Hello and welcome to the Bytesized podcast. I'm your host, Christian Freeman. Every week on the Bytesized podcast, we talk to people doing interesting stuff in technology. That could be a web developer or software managers or artists or really anything interesting in the world of technology. Today, my guest is Brett Terpstra. Brett is an independent software developer, probably best known for the Mac app Marked, which is a Markdown preview application that I love a lot. I've used it for a long time. Brett is also one of the original inspirations I had to get started with programming after I had kind of a bad time in the computer science department of university. So I was feeling a little disillusioned, and Brett's projects were a big part of what got me inspired to start writing code again. So I've been following him for a long time since then, and I was happy to get the chance to finally chat with him and learn a little bit about what Brett's working on, kind of his background, and all kinds of other stuff. I really enjoy this conversation, and I think you will as well. Brett is really cool and has a lot of interesting things to say about getting started, for instance, with programming, or his experience working inside of the Apple developer ecosystem. So really cool conversation, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Without further ado, here is Brett Terpstra. Welcome to the show, Brett. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. I'm really happy to have you on today. I have a story to tell you about how I first heard of your work and stuff like that. But maybe if you want to introduce yourself first and kind of tell people like what you do, what you want to be known for online.
Oh, well, I'm Brett Terpstra. I code an app called Marked on the Mac App Store and sold directly. It is for Markdown previewing, so it has a somewhat limited audience, but it has paid the bills for a while now. Nice. I also do web development. I'm working on a new app that is a replacement for my fork of notational velocity called NVAlt that got way too popular considering it was, not making me any money. So David and I have been working on a new, completely rewritten version of that. And then I guess right now my big thing is I'm publishing demotivational posters every day. You can find them on my Instagram account.
I've seen a couple of those. They're awesome. In fact, I have one open right now. It's good. It says, "It's not imposter syndrome if we all think you're faking it too." It's very excellent.
I've named them Dimspirations.
That's good. So I guess when I mentioned, I kind of teased this story. I don't know. I don't think I've told you this story before. I think because I followed you for a long time, and I actually remember when you followed me on Twitter, I was super excited because I'd been a fan of your stuff. So when I first heard about you and specifically NVAlt, I was in college and I was studying computer science. So it was like my first year, and I was I hated it. I mentioned this in the last episode too, where this idea of education came up a lot, but it just wasn't for me. All this, I guess theoretical stuff that just wasn't working for me. And I came across NVAlt, and it was open source, right, on GitHub.
Yeah.
I think that is still obviously the case.
Yeah.
And in many ways, that was one of the first code projects that I ever learned from. So it was something I could actually open up and kind of tear apart and get things, working on my computer as best as I could. And have I told you about that before?
No.
Okay. So yeah. And I think you actually responded to a ticket I opened up or something, a pull request. And I was so excited. I was wow, this is a real project out there in the world that people are using. So I was really excited about that. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my first experiences, actually looking at, I guess, a fully fledged project, a code project. I didn't even know Objective-C at the time, but I basically had a good in to start kind of just messing with stuff because it was open source.
When I discovered that the notational velocity code was open source, I had a similar reaction. And I also did not know much Objective-C at the time.
Wow.
So notational velocity was my kind of creating NVAlt was my gateway into Mac programming. Prior to that, I'd only done like AppleScript Studio stuff.
I would not have guessed that. It worked so well that I was like, wow, this is, that's awesome. And actually, now that I think about it, the other thing that, there was notational velocity and then, or I guess NVAlt, and then also you had, what was it called? Was it like Slogger or something like that? Do you recall that?
Yeah, I have like 50 repos on my GitHub. So
yeah. So I don't remember where. I must have just, maybe you like tweeted about that or something. But I got that set up on my computer, and it was. Can you describe? Is that still like a project that you are working on, or is that kind of like?
I haven't touched it for a while. People still make commits, and I
Cool.
merge them. I haven't used it for a bit.
How would you describe that project?
So Slogger was a really bad name that is a portmanteau of social logger.
Right.
So it went around to all of your social services, and everything you posted, it would gather music you listen to, like Runkeeper workouts, Twitter, Facebook, all the images you post, all the posts, like stuff you write, and it would gather them into day one, or alternatively into just a markdown log with links to all of the images and everything. And yeah, it was just designed because I realized that a lot of I wasn't great at journaling,
Right.
but I'm a super like open person. I was basically doing my journaling publicly.
Yeah.
So I just made a tool that would turn that into an actual journal for me.
Yeah, I remember I remember opening it up, and I like it. It basically works, like out of the box. But I remember I wanted to try and add a couple things, and Ruby as a language that was written in Ruby, right? I'm recalling that correctly.
Yeah.
So Ruby's a pretty approachable language, comparatively, especially to like Objective-C or something like that. So yeah, and it actually turns out after doing that, I ended up doing Ruby on Rails stuff like full time. So it was a good vehicle. Again, thank you for that, because that was, to some extent, I think being familiar with Ruby there, it helped me feel like I could pick up bigger, like a Rails project or something like that. So
do you want to know how I learned Ruby?
Yes, I do.
So I was a web developer, and I got really into an app called TextMate.
Yep.
And this was in the early days of like TextMate 1.0.
Right.
And Alan Odgaard, the creator of TextMate, had a mailing list, and I was reading it avidly and decided to try my hand at creating some, I think they were called plugins, TextMate plugins. And it was all in Ruby, and I didn't know Ruby at all, but there were a bunch of brilliant people on that list that kind of helped me like accomplish the relatively simple things I wanted to accomplish. And they would send me code, and I would look up, try to figure out how they did what they did. And that Ruby became kind of my scripting language of choice, partly through familiarity. But
what kind of plugins did you write?
I had one called the BlogMate. What was it?
Oh, yes. I remember that.
I forget what it was called, but it was how I met Merlin Mann as well.
Cool.
Through that, it was like this huge bundle that, let's see, like it would do everything from convert euros to dollars in a blog post, do automatic linking, automatic tagging suggestions. For those of us that were working within AOL's kind of content management system at the time, it would also do autofill because they didn't have an API. It was extensive.
Yeah. That's, I think, I'm trying to recall now. I feel like I must have probably run into NVAlt through listening to Back to Work. I would imagine. I'm trying to think where else that would have happened. So I guess that totally makes sense. The Kevin Bacon degrees of separation there. I see the path there. Yeah. So that's funny because like TextMate has like that rich, like you said, it's a Ruby, like all the plugins are Ruby. And then there's also, if you've seen like the Ruby on Rails demo, like the really famous blog demo, I think that was for a lot of people what like sold TextMate for them, right? Is that,
Yeah.
am I recalling that correctly? Does that ring a bell?
It sounds familiar. I
Yeah.
don't remember it now.
So he like the Ruby on Rails guy DHH did this like really, I think he built like a blog with comments and all this stuff in like 10 or 15 minutes, and part of the like magic was all of the TextMate auto completion.
Yep.
Yeah. So and I think so I think that's what got me using TextMate too. Back in like, I mean, this was like after the demo a few years, and like TextMate had been kind of, I think, like stalled in development for a while, but it was still cool enough.
Yeah, it stayed at 2.0 alpha for years.
Yeah, I remember when that came out, and it was very exciting. But
I lost interest in there.
Yeah, so I guess I am curious. One thing that you said way, like, you know, when you introduce yourself is that so you work on Marked like full time now, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
So can you tell me a bit about like that process of getting there? Which that's super interesting. Like, out of all the development things for like my personality, the idea of like working on a project like on my own full time is super interesting to me. Like, mostly because I'm not sure. I think I could do that, but I also wonder if I would get like bored. Can you tell me about like the timeline of that, how that happened?
So I should add that Marked is, I call it full time because it's what is paying most of my bills right now. But I also maintain a blog, run 2 podcasts, do a little bit of freelance work.
Sure.
I have a lot of projects, but I just put out a book. Like, I always have something else going on to distract me from my, full-time job.
Yeah.
But so you're curious about how independent coding happened?
Yeah, I mean, just like, was there I mean, I guess maybe if you have like a timeline, or I'm curious, like if there was a point where you're like, like, oh shit, I could do this, I could do this full time, or at least like I could pay my bills with this.
So without making it too long, I had gone from, I was running my own ad firm for a while. I'm not good at business. That wasn't going great. Like, our work was great, but, and in the meantime, I had gotten into coding via web design, and started working for AOL content division, like Engadget, Tua at the time, Download Squad, Joystick. And doing just freelance contract work for them. And I got a job doing kind of jack of all trades stuff for Agile Bits. And the two of those combined, like both being remote jobs, didn't have to travel much for them. I could kind of do both at once. But then the AOL gig stepped up. The Verge happened. There was a huge exodus.
Sure. Yeah.
And they offered me the tech lead, like senior developer spot. And I'm like, full time, sure.
Yeah.
And a good paycheck. So I dropped everything and I took that, and I did that for years. I think 4 or 5 years.
I don't think I actually knew that. So wait, you took the job at AOL or at The Verge? I'm confused.
AOL.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that.
I took the vacancy left behind after the lead dev headed over to The Verge.
Yeah, because that was like a bunch of Engadget. I mean, I only know like the writers that left, but I think that's how that worked, right?
Yeah, it was probably half the writing staff, the editor-in-chief, and almost all of the development staff.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
So yeah, we given the choice, I probably would have gone to.
Yeah.
But I wasn't on staff at the time, so I was offered the chance to fill in the gaps, and I took it, and it was a great job.
Yeah, I imagine that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, and then over time, I wasn't sleeping well back then. I published Marked. I wrote Marked on a road trip on a MacBook Air in the passenger seat on the way from Minnesota to New Mexico.
Wow.
And then I published that when I got back home. Just threw it out on the Mac App Store. Gruber linked it. Next thing I know, I'm making, we'll say, hundreds of dollars a day.
Yeah.
And pretty soon, between that and like the podcast that I was getting sponsorships on, looking at all of my sources of income, I was making the same amount at night as I was during the day.
Wow. Nice.
And then, which was, like who would complain about double paycheck?
Yeah.
But things soured at work a little bit. There were some management changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I had always promised myself, I'll never work a job that doesn't make me happy every day.
Mm-hmm.
And this job was making me unhappy for at least part of every day. So I said, I'll take a 50% pay cut and just do this. I know I can do it.
Right.
And so I took the leap, and I make it sound like I stood at the precipice and thought about it. I didn't really.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people who would probably, like the idealistic way to do that would be like, oh, it's going to work out like before you get to that point of like comfortably, like, being able to switch in that way. Like I know a lot of people will get to that point and say like, well, either I quit my job and just like do it full time, or I can't do it at all, instead of like trying to make it, like swing it on evenings. Wow, my dog, on evenings and weekends. So that's my dog is such a butt sometimes when I'm recording. So anyway, yeah, I guess that's how I would do it too. But I've been using Marked for since version 1. And I guess I'm curious, like what are your thoughts on selling apps in the App Store, like particularly the Mac App Store? Like I guess what I'm going for is like for something like Marked, I almost feel like it would be like, because you can do upgrade. Can you do upgrade pricing on the Mac App Store?
No.
So that seems like kind of a pain. Like, how is that? Like, do you find yourself fighting against the Mac App Store in that way, or generally, how does that work?
Yeah, I would say the lack of upgrade path, upgrade pricing. I mean, like people for a while were doing this thing because Apple had this complete your bundle setup. So they would basically create a bundle with your current version and the new version, and then offer like a discounted price to complete the bundle.
Oh,
I haven't seen anyone do that for a long time, though.
Like they would be two separate like listings in the App Store.
Right.
Interesting.
Right. And like for me, when I went from Mark 1 to Mark 2.0, I bumped the price from $3 to $13. Mm-hmm. And on the Mac App Store, there just wasn't a good option for offering upgrades, mm-hmm. which is when I started selling direct as well, because then I could give people upgrade pricing. So I do both now.
Has direct been more successful in that way then?
I still make more on the Mac App Store.
Okay.
The Mac App Store is probably 2/3 of my monthly paycheck.
Wow.
And the rest is split between direct and now Set App.
What is Set App? I've seen that like phrase a couple times. Can you tell me like what that is?
So yeah, Set App is a subscription service from MacPaw, where they have their own tiny but hand curated selection of right now just over 100 applications, all like top quality indie applications, and you pay, I think it's $10 a month, and you get all of the applications.
Oh, interesting.
You have access to every application, all in-app purchases enabled, full versions of everything for as long as you have the subscription. And yeah, it's a super good deal. It's I think having a little trouble taking off as an idea, but like there was no way I was ever going to make Marked subscription based.
Right.
Like that. I'm old. I'm 40. I don't think of software as something I rent.
Yeah.
And that's hard for me. But the idea of being part of a store, well, and the other part is like I look at it and I think if all of my crucial applications went subscription, mm-hmm. while it may seem affordable if you look at just the cost of a single app versus its subscription price, when you add up 15 monthly subscriptions, it gets a bit much. So I wasn't going to do that. Set App, to me, still seems like a brilliant idea, and I'm really hoping it takes off.
Yeah, because that, especially, I imagine, like you said, it's all like hand curated. I imagine that the people who probably, reached out to you and said, like, we'd like to include Marked in this probably have the, like the kind of taste where there's lots of other apps that would probably be useful to other people, who would also use Marked, if that makes sense.
Have you ever looked at their app list?
No, I haven't. I should. Can you tell me what some of them?
At setapp.com. Yeah, it's things like iThoughts X and Clean My Mac, Downy. Let's see.
Yeah, there's all kinds of good stuff here. And that's like a lot of stuff that I also...
Timing.
It's like stuff I wouldn't know if I really needed, but like if it's part of a subscription, then I can like try it.
Right. There are enough really cool, like big apps in here to make it worth the subscription. And then you can start trying out all the other stuff. Yummy FTP, Simon Paw. Have you ever used Paw?
Yeah, I have. That's funny because I used Paw until I think they like did an upgrade or something, and I never upgraded after that. So
it's so good.
Yeah. In my full-time job, we for a long time I was working on like this Rails app, and we would keep this like big Paw file in like the Git repository that would basically model out all the requests that we were doing. Yeah, Paw is awesome. That seems like that would be worth the price alone. Cool. I'm gonna have to check this out because that's lots of good apps, and also just like such an interesting idea. So I guess I'm curious. Another thing you mentioned that I didn't know is that you're writing something that's like the successor to NVAlt, right? So
yeah,
I'm very interested in that very selfishly because like I love NVAlt. I think I reached out recently and was like, like I'd love to help test or whatever, but I don't think I knew it was like did you say it's a web app?
No. I don't know what I said that might have sounded like that, but it is definitely, it's a native Mac app.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was like, what? That seems interesting because you just said you don't like subscription stuff. So I guess, Notational Velocity was, I guess, when did that come out? I don't know how to like contextualize that. I mean, it is a note-taking app, but it's like, I think the way it's designed is really interesting.
It's a modal note-taking app, and it was Zachary's original Notational Velocity was the genesis for everything from like Simple Note to Notational or to NVAlt, and all of the very similar, where you start typing. You pop up the window, you start typing, and when you hit enter, it creates a new note for you to continue typing. And you don't have to hit Command N, you don't create new notes. And then if you start typing, it also runs a search at the same time.
Right.
So it can autocomplete and find exactly what you're looking for with instant full text search. And yeah, it's for notes, it's brilliant. A lot of people try to use such apps in as like writing tools, whereas it was never really intended to be for anything other than short notes. So the original code base started to see a lot of those limitations. Like
with large files and stuff like that, or?
Yeah, when people got up to, 14,000 word files.
Interesting.
But
yeah, so I've tried to recreate something similar to NVAlt and like Vim and like in Emacs and like all this stuff, and I can never find I always realize that it's not the structure or like how you put the notes. Like that's not the solution really. It's like you said, this like modal thing. Like that's kind of the innovation. I'm sure I could write like a plugin myself, or maybe there's one that exists for either one of those.
I did find there is a Vim one that it was. I'll say it was pretty good if you like Vim anyway.
You have to have like some tolerance for Vim.
Right, exactly. There's also a pretty good one for Sublime Text that does a very similar thing using the kind of Command Shift P, kind of omnibar thing.
Right.
But yeah, none of it's quite as handy as just having NVAlt, and because NVAlt works with plain text files.
Yeah.
Like it's nothing's proprietary. I'm just keeping a collection of markdown files on my disk, and I can access them from any app.
Right.
So it's nice to have plugins for Vim and Sublime that access the exact same notes as NVAlt is.
Yeah, because I even like there's been times where I'm like, okay, like maybe I don't need Notational Velocity, but I still have all these files. So like I'll just move into Vim. I'll use like I don't know. Have you used Vim much? Are you a Vim user?
Yes, I am a Vim user. Yes.
So you probably use like Control P and that kind of like file finder stuff. So like I always try and end up using that. And again, it's like that modal thing is what I'm missing. But I guess I don't know if you want to talk about it, but is there any like publicly talked about stuff about what you have in the works to replace NVL?
So the app's called BitWriter.
Cool.
And it's been in development for like 3 years now. Mm-hmm. For a year of that, it was just completely stalled because I went through a bunch of medical stuff. And now with recent operating system upgrades, there are a few things that are in code that I didn't write that are no longer working that I'm trying to respectfully fix without, overwriting someone else's code entirely.
Right.
It's currently, it's not at the top of my project list, unfortunately, because Mark has some major updates coming out and I have large video projects and books in the works, and it keeps just slipping. And I'm feeling really bad about it. Like I get multiple emails and DMs every day saying, "Hey, how's it going?"
Yeah, and it was one of those. I'm sorry.
Oh, everybody is. And then things like Bear come out, and Bear is really freaking good.
Yeah.
And it kind of like it ups the ante.
Yeah.
Plus, like I had no plans for an iOS version, but part of what's amazing about Bear is the cross-platform, just kind of access to everything. And I didn't want to get into iCloud.
Yeah,
but
is that iCloud Sync?
Yeah, it's iCloud Sync, and it's all proprietary. Like it's everything stored in database format.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So
it's more like Evernote-y in that sense, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. And that's something I want to avoid. Like sure. I don't make apps that put your data into containers that you can't get to if the app disappears.
You think that's like a function of having like a coding background? I mean that's
yes.
I feel like everyone who
I think it came from like because I started writing for the unofficial Apple weblog in the early 2000s, and I was testing out all kinds of software, and I tested out a pre-release of an app called Evernote.
Yeah, wow.
And it was very cool. Like what they were trying to accomplish was amazing. I got into it for a while, tried to get my data out, all the notes that I had taken. It got to be a real pain. Took a ton of scripting just to get my notes out. Enough scripting that I probably should have just copy pasted everything. But, and then I got into probably 20 different note storage apps. I got into a bunch of photo editing apps, all of these things with proprietary formats. And even to-do lists, I've tried every single to-do app on the market because I was writing about them. And all of a sudden you start to really think about data portability.
Yeah.
And that has become like a major tenet in my overall philosophy is everything has to be portable. I won't use an app if I feel claustrophobic at all.
Yeah, I've had the similar experience, and I'm not sure I can recall like a specific. I've never had like a, like, oh my God, I've lost everything moment because I can't export something out of, application X to application Y. But I think maybe it's, it might just be like a programmer thing. It might be like I've had just enough like Unix indoctrination through using OS 10 and like using, like the terminal, like command line stuff built into that, and like, and just working as a programmer full time that now I'm just like really, it's the thing like with Evernote, like Evernote is awesome as long as you stay inside Evernote. And then when you want to export, especially like you're talking about like porting stuff out of Evernote, like not only is that text, it's also, like photos and it's like OCR'd photos and stuff. So there's like all this context to it that you basically will lose if you can even get it out. I'm sure you can get it out now. I'm sure people have written tools for that, but
yeah. I would point to the example of, and you're very likely way too young for this, but WordPerfect.
I don't know what that is.
Prior to Microsoft developing Word, there was an app called WordPerfect. And this was back DOS days of like IBM PC Junior.
Right.
And those files, everyone kind of, they had 5.25-inch floppies filled with WordPerfect files. And then WordPerfect was discontinued. Everyone kind of moved to WordStar, to Word. And then you go back and you look at your archives and you realize this app doesn't exist in any form that will run on a modern computer.
Yeah.
And the files are in a binary format that is basically unusable.
Right.
So
Scary.
There was a widespread kind of panic. There are converters available now, but it's that feeling of, I didn't feel like this data was inaccessible. I figured there's always going to be a way to convert it, but every once in a while, an app disappears, it can't be found, and you can't get to that Drobo full of files you have.
What do you think is going to be like the next thing like that, next panic thing in that way?
I feel like it happens regularly for Evernote users.
Yeah.
Because most people who have been using Evernote for years have no intention of leaving, so they don't think about it and they just keep building these huge notebooks.
Right.
And eventually, something tempts you away. And so you're like, okay, so I'll just export my notes. And your options are like individual HTML files or this Evernote XML format. It's still way better than things used to be. Most apps are storing all of their data in either like an XML, plist, or JSON format that you can easily read, through a script. They're not necessarily human readable, but they're easy to script. So I don't know that there will be another like WordPerfect level disaster, but there are plenty of apps. And I guess to me, I know how to take the Evernote export as XML, read through it, and output, a bunch of markdown files. Not everybody can do that, I've found.
Yeah, that's a bit level up than like using Evernote day to day. I guess when I asked that question to you, the thing that came to mind for me is like maybe iMessage. I guess like I was gonna say or Twitter, but like Twitter does have export tools and stuff like that. I don't know though if I ever really like, do I want my iMessages backed up? I don't know if I care that much.
There's an app from FlexiBits
that does that.
That will, it backs up and makes searchable all of your iMessage chats. And I think that's brilliant because, for even power users, getting that data out of iMessage, if you have like a really important thread with like a business associate that you do actually need to archive, there's no simple way to do it, but there are apps that will do it.
Right, because it like blurs it's not just like, group chats with friends or like with your partner. It also is like business and Oh, that scares me. Now I need to like I need to go back up.
Chatology.
Yeah. Is that what it's called? Chatology?
Yeah, Chatology.
Cool. Yeah, because I think I for a long time had like hopes that they would make it like an open format that you could use other places, and I just kind of gave up on that eventually. But I haven't really thought about it recently.
Were you ever an Adium user?
I was, yeah.
You know how Adium stores all of its chats in transcript files? You can basically enable that in iMessages.
Oh.
And it will save those same kind of files. And that's what Chatology...
That's what it uses.
If you have that enabled, then Chatology will start parsing that to save things.
Interesting. Yeah, well, because I guess the iMessage app is kind of based on like... Is it based on iChat? Or like at least that's what it kind of replaced. Yeah. So I guess that exists still. Yeah. Wow, I forgot about Adium, however you say that. That was fun. Like so much customization and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm gonna go back up my iMessages after this because now I've scared myself.
I'm with you though. There are a good 90% of my iMessages that I do not need archived or want archived.
Yeah, just like stickers back and forth, or like the have you done like the Animoji thing now?
I have not yet gotten my iPhone 10, but
it's cool, but like, that's definitely something I don't need back.
I use My Talking Pet. It's an app. It's an app for iOS where you can take a picture of your pet's face and then you draw it on like a little wireframe, like where the edges of the mouth are, the chin, the teeth, the eyes, the center of the eyes, and it will start animating it. And then you talk into the microphone and it makes your pet talk, and it can shift the voice a little bit. And like the eyes like will move and the lips move, and it's creepy cool.
It's the future that we dreamed of.
That's my current Animoji.
I mean, that is like, it's like the best Animoji because it's your actual pet.
My pit bull talking to people, yeah.
Wow, I'm gonna download this. This does look creepy good. So I was curious if maybe you like you said you kind of got into web design. How did that process happen? So I guess let me contextualize here. So I am like a self-taught developer, and I find that like I guess like the way that people get into development, that's super interesting, because everyone has a slightly different story, and I'm still like undecided if there's like, you know, like truths to all of these stories, like they can be kind of honed down into like fundamental principles that people can actually use, because everyone's story is so different. But I'm curious, like, do you have a particularly like interesting story in that sense of how you got into that?
So I wrote my first web page the first year that the web was accessible to Minnesota, which I believe would have been like 93, 94. As soon as it was there, I learned HTML and I started making web pages. The car dealership in Winona, Minnesota, they had like the first web page on the internet, and I made that. And like, it was just, at the time I'd been running a BBS and I was just constantly hacking away at stuff. And not because I was a computer genius, just because it was a way that I could really easily express creativity and really easily like do things that I couldn't, you know, otherwise do. So it had just been, since I was 6 years old, just a constant exploration. But then I thought I'll go into computer science because I'm good at this, and then did not do well with computer science. Dropped out of the U of M, Minnesota, and went to art school, where I ended up getting into the interactive multimedia program, which now would be known as web design. But back then we were learning how to do art projects in Flash and Director. And I took that, I ran with it. I got done there, I became an art director for a fashion company, and also started working on their website in the background, of course, and developing skills, like just constantly like keeping up. Like, I was super happy to drop Flash and learn, you know, other alternative methods. And then I just kind of went straight back to full-time hacking and coding. And design is fun, but coding is more fun for me.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
So I don't know how to make that accessible to everybody, but I would say that kind of the takeaway from that is just constant exploration.
Yeah.
Like, you want to do something, figure out how. Like, these days, oh my God, GitHub.
Right.
Like, if you want to learn how to code in Python, you find a Python app that does something you want to do, and you dissect it, reverse engineer it. And then, you know, obviously you're going to want to read a book, take a course at some point. But as far as quickly expanding your skill set, the amount of code that you can look at now is insane.
Yeah, I mean, that's like I was saying earlier, that's what I did with with some of your projects and with some others.
And that's where all those projects came from.
Yeah, exactly. So that is that's one of those like very non-sexy tips, is like there's no like kind of,
oh dude, GitHub is sexy as hell.
It is, yeah, but it's not as fun to tell someone like just go write code for hours and hours and look at code for hours and hours. But in some ways that is kind of what you have to do.
Well, if someone wanted to jumpstart the camps that are available, everything from like app camp for girls to what's the Big Nerd Ranch, like those are an immersive like week-long start from scratch, learn to code, and like those can be really fun. I got to go to Big Nerd Ranch for 1 week, and I was kind of amazed at how quickly they could take someone from basically I've heard of programming to here's my first iPhone app. So, I mean, if you have the money to invest in courses like that, it's great. But even then, you're not going to learn, Python and Ruby at a camp where you're learning Objective-C and Swift. So you're going to want to eventually just explore, like just wander and look at other people's code.
I mean, I ended up not really writing a lot of Objective-C after I was looking at like NVAlt and other projects that were in Objective-C. But in some ways it was, I think, good to like encounter kind of a scary language because I was like, okay, I know I can, like somewhat comfortably I don't know about comfortably, but I can somewhat understand what's going on here. So like maybe this other stuff isn't like, I can do this if I just kind of soldier through it.
We used to have to write CGIs, like the script, the backend scripts for a website. We used to have to write those in Perl. And I never liked Perl. I'm still not good at Perl. I was ecstatic when I could just start doing everything in PHP. And then once Rails hit, things have changed a lot. Now you can kind of be picky about what back-end language you're going to use.
Yeah, you can. Oh yeah. I mean, it's an endless source of debate, right? I mean, for me, like once I learned Rails, it's still been the case that I haven't ever really had to do it. And I know a lot of other things that I could choose from, but it's like most of the time, say I'm starting like a new project or something, I'll always pick Rails. But
well, yeah, because it's what you're fastest in.
Yeah, but I've never written. Maybe I've written a little bit of Perl, but I feel the same way with like Python stuff as well. It's like it's just so fast now, and also like the amount of open source code. Like there's so many libraries for Python and Ruby.
Have you seen Marky the Markdownifier?
I haven't.
AKA Heck Yes Markdown.
No, what is that?
If you go to markdownrules.com, that's a project that I wrote based off of Aaron Schwartz's HTML to text script. And it's a website that you can punch in a URL and there's an API for it, and it will turn any web page into Markdown for you. Strip out ads and headers and everything using readability, like Arc90's version of readability. And that's why I had to learn Python, like just to hack that together. I'm not great at Python, but between that and Markdown editing, my package for Sublime Text.
Is that Python as well?
Yeah, all Sublime plugins are primarily Python. So
there is like a degree of kind of, I guess, like portability between, and maybe not completely, but even like Ruby and Python, like this. I guess Fred always felt to me like you express things in similar ways between both languages.
Well, and that's the thing with all programming is once you understand algorithms, you can just look at the syntax. How do I do a for loop in this language? Like how do I break out of a for loop in this language? Things change. Like some things aren't as intuitive between one or the other. But if you understand the algorithm and you can do it in one language, you already know how to do it in the other language. You just have to translate the syntax.
So, yeah, because I mean, I just started a project recently in like Node, right? Like JavaScript. And I find myself doing, it's funny because I haven't really written a lot of Node before. I find myself doing that same kind of like Google search, how do I, like you just said, how do I break out of a for loop or something like that, which is
Stack Exchange,
Stack Overflow, and
like Stack Overflow and all of its sibling sites are as great to me as GitHub. I would warn anyone against just copy pasting random code from Stack Overflow into your project without understanding it. But between those, and do you use Dash?
I've heard of Dash, and I think I used to have it installed, but I haven't ever gotten into like a flow of using it well.
Oh man, Dash, I can just type like JS : and then whatever method I need to look up in JavaScript, or RB : to look it up for Ruby, and it's all of the manuals for every language you want on a hotkey, basically.
That seems like something I could probably use. In some ways, I'm like so stuck in my ways. I'm like, I should add.
Well, I would love to pare my life down to like 1, maybe 2 languages. And even in web development, you can't do that anymore.
No, you have to.
Because now you need manuals for Node and Angular and jQuery. And yeah, it's a crazy world.
I've done a couple times. I've done like training for people in React. If you've played around with React at all, the JavaScript framework, and it's very like deceptive because it's called React training, but it's like HTML and a little bit of CSS, and then like also the actual JavaScript language, right? It is a language in its own that has like a lot of quirks, in particular more than a lot of other languages, and then finally you get to the React part of it. And it's like this journey. I've had people ask me, about like getting started with programming, and unfortunately, I find it's rarely can you just learn like one language. Like you have to pick up this entire like gauntlet of stuff and like get familiar with all of it.
Right. And I used to tell people start with Python only because everyone I knew in like education, I guess it's the number of like libraries that are available for Python. You can basically do anything. And once again, you're just learning algorithms, but I don't even like Python that much. I would just recommend that because it seemed more useful. These days though, honestly, JavaScript, like you said, it's a little bit too loose of a language. But if you can learn to write object-oriented code, if you can learn to write MVC code in JavaScript, you can learn anything. Plus, it's really easy to have like an REPL loop. So like you can just open the inspector on a browser and test out code.
Yeah, I have people often, when I do the training and I open up the inspector and start writing JavaScript in there's a lot of people who are like, what is that? Like they didn't know that was a thing that existed in the browser they use all the time. JavaScript is ubiquitous. Do you write a lot of JavaScript daily?
Yes.
Have you used TypeScript at all? Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with it, but I've not ever used it.
It's if you have a project of great enough complexity that it's actually worth it to add it, it's super cool. But I find like we have a lot of JavaScript projects at my job, like my full-time gig, and like it's just such a like to teach everyone a new-ish thing, right? It's like JavaScript with all this other like type definition stuff, and like if you never worked in like a typed language or anything like that, it can be really daunting, I guess, but it's really cool. You should check it out if you have the right project for it. But it's cool because, like you said, JavaScript is really loose.
Yeah, my next goal is to learn EMA script 6 and just start writing everything like that and using something like Babel to downgrade it.
That's a whole journey of like configuration and stuff like that. That's the kind of thing that why I like Rails is because it figures out all of that for me.
It's kind of like asking an Objective-C developer to learn Swift.
Have you learned Swift?
It's I've been through the initial like Apple book on Swift. I'm not planning to port any existing applications over to Swift right now. I think if I were going to start a brand new, especially if it were an iOS app, I would consider doing it in Swift. But I'm not porting.
I've only done like really basic like those kind of like hello world applications in Swift. And it's interesting, but it's like just enough new concepts that I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this right now.
It's actually pretty great as a command line scripting app.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't tried that. Does it have like a REPL or whatever?
Yeah, like the Swift command, I think it is on the command line.
Oh, I did not know that. Yeah, I can imagine it is. I mean, you wouldn't write Objective-C scripts probably too much, but I could see Swift being good for that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can write your scripts and then just execute them directly with the command line tool, which means then you don't have to constantly compile. And yeah, it's pretty cool.
So you work full time in like Objective-C and stuff like that. What, like, obviously you said you picked some of it up from like NVL. What would you recommend to someone who like wanted to get started doing that kind of stuff? Like, is that, like a Big Nerd Ranch is the place to go, or their books are the place to go, or like, are there other resources that you like?
So you can do what I did and just reverse engineer code until it makes sense, and then in the process make huge messes.
Yeah.
That you then have to go and clean up once you understand why you broke it to begin with. Or there are tons of courses. Udemy has a lot of good ones. That's the only one I can think of offhand. But if you just Google for Objective-C or Swift or whatever language you want to learn and find a video course, I would highly recommend if you're capable of watching a video, which I'm not actually, but if you are, do that. It's not MIT, Harvard maybe has like free video series that are really, really good.
Or like one of those like open courseware kind of things, right?
Yeah. And it's like auditing a class for free.
Yeah. I remember the reason that I liked Objective-C and that I liked picking up, like looking at NVL and stuff like that, is that I could, and it's kind of similar. You're talking about like creativity and like web development. It's that same kind of thing where like I could actually have something appear on the screen, like I can compile this into like an application that I can actually use. I imagine a lot of people probably want to get into programming via like app development or stuff like that, right? Because it's like very immediate.
And games, yeah.
But I almost feel like maybe Swift is better in this way, but it's like Objective-C is kind of a hard first language to recommend to someone, I think.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I wouldn't. In fact, if you go to any course, they'll teach you C fundamentals before they'll even introduce Objective-C.
Right. And I remember learning, like going through an Objective-C book. I think I still have it. I think it is like a Big Nerd Ranch book, actually. And I remember being like, I want to write apps. Why am I learning C fundamentals? And then like I would go deeper in the book and I'd be like, oh, this is actually like this is actually more complicated than the C fundamentals. Can we go back to doing that now? It's like, at least, yeah.
If you want good books on either Objective-C or Swift, Erica Sidun, I think she's publishing through O'Reilly. But her books are basically the Bibles for these things.
Yeah. I mean, if I had the time, I actually would love to properly pick up Swift and write like a full app with it. Though I guess like I'm more lazy. I would use like React Native now just because that's something that I know. I know how that all fits together already, but yeah.
Yeah, if you think the App Store is hard writing Objective-C, try submitting a React app
to the App Store. I've never done that. I imagine it all like breaks down somewhere there.
Every time I Google for a problem I had with the App Store version of Marked, the first things I find are always React user forums where they're having the same problem. So it seems like any problem I can have, plus 10 more. Yeah.
That's funny. So what do you, I guess, like, this is such a, like, I mean, maybe you're similar to me in that you listen to like a lot of like Apple-y podcasts. So this is a very like Apple-y podcast question, but I'm curious as like an indie developer, what do you think of like the state of the Apple developer ecosystem? And I guess in particular, like OS 10, how do you like versus say like 5 years ago and like versus now, and then maybe what you see in the future? I'm curious what your impressions are of that.
I honestly cannot predict the future on this. Things have been, the walled garden is closing in. With sandboxing and increasing regulations on App Store submissions, apps can do less with the overall system and they have to do more internally.
Right.
And it's getting harder and harder to even talk to each other. So for me, like in my workflows, that's a huge hindrance.
I mean, your app in particular is an example of like definitely needs to reach out to other things, right?
Marked only works if it's with another app. So I'm not really happy with the direction things are going, because it's clear that what Apple really wants is a locked down system. And a lockdown system would be closer to working on an iPad, where you basically work in one app at a time. And if you're lucky, the app you need to get data to has a share panel and you can, but the idea of like direct integration isn't there. And I'm sensing Apple is definitely moving away from that on the Mac. And then like the App Store itself right now, if you don't get featured by Apple or get lucky enough to have like a major blogger link you, apps just die. Really good apps immediately disappear. No one ever hears about them. And it's not an egalitarian system for app discovery.
Yeah, I mean they did that big like discovery thing on iOS, right, where they started like writing about apps and stuff. They have a really
right, but it's still whatever they curate.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's definitely not great, because it definitely like you said, is not egalitarian.
So I guess I'm a little sour right now. It's hard for me to say, because I'm always the last to complain about this stuff. You know, I'll see everyone else reacting to changes and I'll sit back and say, okay, let's see what happens. Give it 6 months and let's see how everyone's talking. And usually things pan out.
Yeah.
But for the last couple of years, it's been a little bit depressing.
Yeah. It is definitely moving in the direction of, I think, like more locked down.
Well, and I just started reading articles in the last couple of days about this planned universal operating system between iOS and macOS.
Yeah. I was wondering if you saw that. Can you like describe that? If that's like, I don't know about breaking news, but that's like the last couple of days, right? That news came out.
Yeah, I cannot speak in any educated way on it. I can say that it is kind of my worst fear for macOS.
Yeah. I mean,
like we started seeing aspects of iOS show up in macOS after Yosemite,
right?
It was cool. There were a lot of cool developments. But if we're going to actually have a universal system between the two, so a developer can write one app and have it work on your Mac and your iPad, I have to assume that your Mac is going to work like your iPad instead of vice versa.
Yeah. It's going to tip in the scales of iOS, definitely.
And it's why I don't work on my iPad. Like I'll write on my iPad, but I'll write stuff that's going back to my Mac, where I can run all my scripts and I can have all my workflows and everything's smooth.
Yeah.
Automated. Yeah.
I've never felt like I could do like programming on the iPad, and so I can't imagine that that'll ever be something that will be well. I mean, like again, that's another example of like you need to access everything and anything, that you can't really have that be like, if Vim was sandbox, that would be a big problem for me. It seems ridiculous, right? But like that, I mean, that is essentially what's happening. There's a lot of people that use.
Did you ever use the Vim that came out for iOS?
I did. Yeah, I tried for a little bit.
I tried too.
clearly I wasn't positive because I can't even remember any of it. I must have deleted it like immediately. I mean, which is unfortunate because like that's a cool, like that someone took the time to do that is awesome. Like I love Vim.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense on iOS though, which is, my fear. All of a sudden it won't make sense on the Mac either.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Cause I mean, like if they want to sandbox things, there's also like, what's the, is it like SIP or something, like system integrity? Have you run into that at all?
Yeah.
Like when you try and install certain things, it's like it's like an OS level kind of sandbox basically.
SIP can be triggered by like the slightest. I released after like a year, we updated NVAlt just to get it working again with 10.13.
Yeah.
And immediately everyone was like, every time I try to install this, I get this unidentified developer, even though I was code signing it and it was passing verification. Turned out to be like one script buried inside of two subfolders, wasn't getting properly signed.
Oh no.
And yeah, I keep SIP running all the time just because I need to be able to test that my stuff will work for the normal user.
Right.
But if I weren't doing that, I would 100% disable it.
Yeah, that's a kind of a weird QA kind of thing where like it's really I don't actually know if I have it turned on my computer. But yeah, that's funny. I mean, because you're definitely not an unidentified developer if you're sending it. Like, would it still go through the Mac App Store, or that was like,
no?
Oh, this is NVL.
This was distributing a developer an app that is signed with a developer ID.
Right.
So, because I mean, even now, even outside of the App Store, if you don't sign the app, Mac OS will basically not let you run it unless you change your security settings.
Yeah.
And that
did that. Like, that's one of the first things I do anytime I get a new computer.
Yeah.
Or worse. hasn't bit me yet. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. There's really, if you're smart and you know what you're doing, you don't necessarily need the babysitter.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't mind. I think the security of Mac OS, give or take, a few recent incidents. Overall, I appreciate it. I appreciate working on a platform it doesn't get viruses. Like malware is few and far between. That's rare these days, and I do enjoy that.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that in like years. Same with iOS. I mean, in some ways, maybe like some moves to iOS would be like some of the architecture stuff would be cool. I'm thinking of like is it called like Secure Enclave and that kind of stuff. I guess that's like hardware level stuff, but there are some really cool innovations that definitely happen on iOS. But I do just feel like there's a whole like demographic of people that are going to get screwed when suddenly like things don't work. I mean, I'm looking at like every single app I have open is the kind of thing that I just can't imagine. Scary working on iOS. I'm going into panic mode. So I need to back up my iMessages. I need to like move to Linux full time. Like all of this stuff.
It can't hurt to have a dual boot system with the Linux backup.
Yeah, I need to get prepared. It's like prepping, basically.
It's your bunker.
Yeah, I need to have my Linux bunker. I feel like that is what Linux is basically like a Fallout shelter or something like that.
That's perfect. That's the title of the episode.
Yes, I love it. Cool. Well, I think we're pretty much there on time. But I do want to give you the opportunity to plug anything that you're working on.
You can find me at brettterpstra.com, and if you click the projects menu option there, you'll see all of my stuff, including Marked, which is at marked2app.com. And then I'm TT Scoff on everything: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, probably Tumblr, and
MySpace. I don't know about that.
I was Terpstra_Brett on MySpace. I'm pretty sure I deleted that account.
Okay.
But yeah, so, and GitHub, Last.fm. Ello, I think I'm TT Scoff there too. I was on app. Anyway, TT Scoff is the only thing you really need to remember, TTSCOFF, you'll find me.
Cool. Yeah, and I can personally vouch for Marked. If you're writing Markdown at all, it is wonderful. The way that you designed it to work with the stuff that I already used is still very genius. So nice job on that.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure to chat. Finally, I've been a fan of yours for a very long time, and yeah, thanks again, and good luck with all your projects.
It was a pleasure to be here.
My thanks to Brett for coming on the show. It was a really fun conversation, and it gave me a lot to, I guess, look up in the future. And I really did go and back up my iMessages, like I mentioned in the conversation. So if you want to follow Brett, you can find him on Twitter at TTScoff, also brettterpstra.com. As always, you can follow the Bytesized Podcast on Twitter at BytesizedPod. You can follow me on Twitter at I'mKMF. You can also go to bytesizedpod.com, and you can see other episodes of the show and subscribe to the podcast there as well. Speaking of subscribing to the podcast, if you enjoy this show, if you enjoyed other episodes, if you could leave us a review on iTunes, that actually helps a lot with people discovering the podcast. It's not just a vanity metric. It has real benefit to helping our audience grow. So if you could do that, that would be awesome. No pressure. We're happy to have you here either way. So that is it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to the Bytesized Podcast.